The purple trees of Kepler 442b glowed softly in the darkness. Jake Morrison walked along the edge of the human settlement, checking the fence line like he did every night. He had been on this planet for 3 months now, and the strange forest still amazed him. Everything here seemed to glow with its own light. Jake heard a sound that made him stop. It was small and sad, like a kitten crying. He moved toward the noise carefully. His hand went to the weapon on his belt. The briefing files had warned them about the creatures here. The Vraken were the most dangerous animals on this world. They grew to 7 feet tall with black scales and jaws that could crush metal. But what came out from under the purple plants was not dangerous at all. It was tiny. The little creature was no bigger than a cat. Its scales were soft and gray instead of black. Big yellow eyes looked up at Jake. The baby Vraken walked toward him without any fear. Jake stood very still. The cub sniffed at his boots. Then it opened its mouth and bit his boot gently. The bite did not hurt at all. The baby Vraken looked up at Jake and made a happy chirping sound. Jake slowly bent down. The cub tried to climb up his leg right away. Its small claws caught on his uniform. Jake picked up the creature, expecting it to be scared. Instead, the baby curled against his chest. It started making a sound like a cat purring. Jake smiled. He looked around the forest. Where was this baby's family? Why was it all alone? He made a decision that would change everything. He carried the small Vraken back to the settlement. Commander Lisa Hayes was not happy when Jake walked into the base with the creature. She stared at him with her arms crossed. The baby Vraken was sitting on Jake's shoulder now, watching everything with curious eyes. Lisa spoke in a calm but angry voice. She told Jake that he had brought a deadly predator into their home. When these creatures grew up, they were classified as extremely dangerous, Jake argued back. He said the baby was alone in the forest. Its family might be dead. They could not just leave it to die. The cub made a small sound and pressed closer to Jake's neck. Peter Chen stepped forward. He was the settlement's science officer who studied alien animals. Peter said this was an amazing chance to learn about the Vraken. Nobody knew anything about how they grew up or how they lived. If Jake had somehow bonded with this baby, they could learn so much. Lisa looked at all 3 of them. The baby Vraken yawned, showing many sharp little teeth. She sighed and agreed. But she told Jake that the creature was his responsibility. If it showed any signs of being dangerous, it had to go back to the forest. Jake felt relieved. He agreed to all of Lisa's rules. He decided to name the cub Scout. The first days were hard. Scout wanted to explore everything. He had so much energy for such a small animal. He chewed through 3 pairs of Jake's boots before they figured out what he needed to eat. Peter worked long hours testing different foods. Jake tried his best to keep Scout from causing too much trouble in the settlement. The other humans had different feelings about Scout. Some people liked him. Danny Parker was an engineer who thought Scout was fascinating. He would spend his free time watching the cub play. Other people did not trust Scout. Karen White was the head of security. She stayed away from Scout and told Jake it was a bad idea. Karen warned Jake one evening. She said Scout would become a problem. The adult Vraken were huge. What would happen when Scout grew bigger and his playful bites were not playful anymore? Jake had thought about this many times. Scout was already growing fast. In just 3 weeks, he had doubled in size. His scales were getting darker. They were turning from gray to a dark silver color. But Scout was still gentle with all the humans, especially with Jake. Everything changed during a big storm. The wind was blowing so hard that it shook their buildings. Rain came down so heavy that nobody could see very far. Scout became worried. He walked back and forth in the room that Jake had made into his den. Jake tried to calm Scout down, but the cub kept pacing. Then the alarm started making loud noises. Part of the fence had fallen down. Wild animals were getting into the settlement. Lisa told everyone to help protect the base. Jake grabbed his equipment. Scout ran past him toward the broken fence. Jake shouted for Scout to stop. He ran after the cub. What he saw made him freeze in place. Scout was now as big as a large dog. He had put himself between a group of wild predators and the building where people were working with plants. Scout's body had changed. His scales laid flat, making him look bigger. A deep growling sound came from his chest. Jake had never heard Scout make that sound before. The wild animals saw Scout and recognized what he was. Even though Scout was young, he was still a Vraken. The predators backed away slowly. Then they ran back into the storm. Scout stayed ready to fight until Jake reached him. Only then did the cub relax. He turned and pressed his head against Jake's leg. This was something Scout did when he wanted comfort. Jake was amazed. He put his hand on Scout's wet scales and said that Scout had protected them. Peter had watched everything from the plant building. He came outside with excitement on his face. Peter said it was remarkable. Scout was acting like he was protecting his pack. Peter explained that Scout did not see himself as separate from the humans. Scout thought the humans were his family. That night changed how many people felt about Scout. He was not just Jake's strange pet anymore. Scout was one of them. He was part of their community. Jake sat with Scout in his quarters after the storm ended. The cub was tired and rested his head in Jake's lap. Jake scratched behind Scout's jaw ridge. He thought about what Peter had said. Scout really did see them as family. Jake made a quiet promise to Scout. He said he would always protect him just like Scout had protected them. The cub made a soft, happy sound. His eyes closed as he fell asleep. Outside, the storm was ending. The purple forest started to glow again in the darkness. Jake looked out the window at the strange, beautiful world. He wondered what other surprises this planet had waiting for them. He wondered if there were more Vraken out there. He wondered if Scout would ever meet his own kind again. But for now, Scout was safe. Scout was home, and Jake knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Scout grew bigger every day. 4 weeks had passed since Jake found him in the forest. The cub was now 3 times his original size. His scales had changed from soft gray to hard dark silver. But even though Scout looked more dangerous, he was still gentle with the humans. Life at the settlement fell into a new routine. Scout followed Jake everywhere during the day. At night, the Vraken slept in the corner of Jake's quarters. Scout had his own bed now, but he often ended up sleeping next to Jake's bunk. The biggest challenge was feeding Scout. Peter discovered that Scout needed special minerals that were not common in their regular food supplies. Jake had to take Scout into the forest to hunt twice a week. Watching Scout catch his prey was both amazing and a little scary. The cub was a natural hunter. He moved through the trees silently. His reflexes were incredibly fast, but Scout always came back to Jake after hunting. He would make his happy chirping sounds and press his head against Jake's chest. It was clear that hunting was just instinct. His real home was with the humans. Not everyone was comfortable with Scout yet. Karen White still kept her distance. She watched Scout carefully whenever he was near other people. One day she pulled Jake aside for a serious talk. Karen told Jake that Scout was going to be a problem someday. She reminded him that the adult Vraken in the briefing files were massive and deadly. What would happen when Scout reached that size? Would those playful behaviors turn into something dangerous? Jake understood her concerns. He had the same worries sometimes late at night. But every day Scout showed that he understood right from wrong. When Scout played too rough, Jake would tell him to be gentle. Scout always listened. He would immediately soften his grip or stop whatever he was doing. Peter was keeping detailed notes on Scout's development. He said Scout was learning faster than any animal he had ever studied. Scout understood dozens of words now. He could follow complex commands. More than that, Scout seemed to understand emotions. If someone was sad, Scout would sit quietly beside them. If someone was happy, Scout's own mood would lift. Danny Parker became Scout's second favorite human after Jake. Danny would bring Scout treats and teach him tricks. Scout learned to retrieve objects, to stay in place until called, and even to open doors with his claws. Danny joked that Scout was smarter than half the engineers on the base. Then came the day that proved Scout was truly special. A group of scientists were working in the forest about a mile from the settlement. They were collecting plant samples. Jake and Scout were with them, providing security. One of the scientists, a woman named Beth Harris, wandered away from the group. She was following a particular type of glowing flower that kept leading her deeper into the trees. She did not realize how far she had gone until she looked up and could not see the others. Beth tried to find her way back, but everything looked the same in the purple forest. The trees all glowed with the same light. She started walking in what she thought was the right direction. She was actually going the wrong way. Back at the collection site, Jake noticed Beth was missing. He called out for her. There was no answer. The forest was too thick for their communication devices to work well. Jake felt panic rising. The forest was dangerous, especially alone. Scout sensed Jake's distress immediately. The Vraken stood up and sniffed the air. His head turned in a specific direction. Scout looked at Jake and made an urgent sound. Then Scout started walking into the forest. Jake trusted Scout's instincts. He followed the Vraken, telling the other scientists to stay put. Scout moved quickly but carefully through the undergrowth. He kept his nose to the ground, clearly tracking Beth's scent. They traveled for almost 20 minutes. They found Beth near a steep cliff. She was backing away from a group of native animals that Jake did not recognize. The creatures were smaller than Bracken but looked aggressive. They had backed Beth almost to the edge of the cliff. Scout did not hesitate. He charged forward with a roar that made the whole forest go quiet. The aggressive animals saw the Bracken coming and scattered immediately. Scout positioned himself between Beth and the cliff edge. He checked to make sure she was safe before turning back to Jake. Beth was shaking but unhurt. She kept thanking Scout over and over. Scout seemed to understand her gratitude. He gently nudged her hand with his nose the same way he did with Jake when offering comfort. On the walk back to the settlement, Beth told everyone what happened. By the time they got home, the whole base knew that Scout had saved someone's life. The story spread quickly. Even people who had been nervous about Scout started to see him differently. That night, Commander Hayes called Jake to her office. Scout came too. He always went where Jake went. Lisa looked at both of them for a long moment before speaking. She told Jake that she had been wrong to doubt Scout. She admitted that she had been planning to send Scout back to the wild when he got bigger. But what Scout did today changed her mind. Scout was not just an animal following instincts. He was making choices. He was choosing to protect the humans. Lisa said that Scout could stay permanently. More than that, she was creating a new position in the settlement. Jake would be Scout's official handler. It would be his full-time job to work with Scout and help integrate the Bracken into the community. Jake felt overwhelming relief and joy. He thanked Lisa. Scout seemed to understand the moment was important. He made a happy sound that was almost like a purr. Over the next few weeks, Scout became a real member of the settlement. He had his own identification badge that Danny made as a joke. Scout wore it on a special collar. Everyone laughed, but they also treated it seriously. When people saw Scout wearing his badge, they greeted him by name. Scout started joining the morning patrols officially. His senses were far better than any human technology. He could smell danger long before their scanners detected it. He could hear sounds that human ears missed completely. He could even sense vibrations in the ground that warned of geological instability. Jake was amazed by how much Scout understood. The Bracken knew the difference between a regular patrol and an emergency response. He knew which buildings were off limits and which ones he could enter. He knew every person in the settlement by sight and smell. But Scout's intelligence went beyond just training. One day, Jake was feeling sick with a fever. He tried to do his regular duties anyway. Scout refused to let him leave their quarters. Every time Jake tried to get up, Scout would gently push him back down. Finally, Scout went and got Peter by tugging on the scientist's sleeve until Peter followed him. Peter found Jake and immediately ordered him to the medical bay. Jake had a serious infection that needed treatment. If he had kept working, it could have gotten much worse. Peter said that Scout had probably saved Jake's life by forcing him to rest. That evening, Scout stayed by Jake's side in the medical bay. He rested his big head on the edge of Jake's bed. His yellow eyes watched Jake with obvious concern. Jake reached out and scratched behind Scout's jaw ridge. Jake told Scout that he was a good boy. The best boy. Scout made his purring sound. Jake thought about how much his life had changed in just a few months. Finding Scout had seemed like a simple act of kindness, but it had become so much more. Scout was not just a pet or even just a friend. Scout was family in every way that mattered. Outside the medical bay window, the purple forest glowed in the night. Somewhere out there were more Bracken. Scout's own kind. Jake wondered if they would ever meet them. He wondered if Scout remembered his original family. But for now, Scout seemed perfectly content with his human family. And Jake could not imagine life without Scout anymore. 6 months after Jake found Scout, a ship arrived from Earth. The ship carried an inspection team from the Frontier Corps. These inspections happened regularly to make sure settlements were following all the rules and staying safe. But this visit felt different. Jake had a bad feeling about it. Captain Ryan Foster led the inspection team. He was a tall man with gray hair and a serious face. The moment he stepped off the ship and saw Scout, his expression became even more serious. Scout was almost full-grown now. He stood 5 feet tall at the shoulder. His scales were deep black with blue highlights. He looked exactly like the dangerous predators from the warning files. Ryan called for an immediate meeting with Commander Hayes. Jake was ordered to bring Scout. In the meeting room, Ryan made his position very clear. He said that Jake had broken multiple safety protocols. Keeping a dangerous predator in a human settlement was against regulations. The Vraken needed to be removed immediately, Jake tried to explain. He told Ryan that Scout had saved lives. Scout was not dangerous to humans. Scout was part of their community. But Ryan did not want to listen. He said that personal feelings could not change the basic nature of a predator. Lisa spoke up. She suggested that Ryan should observe Scout for a few days before making his final decision. She said that reports and files could not capture what Scout really was. Ryan needed to see for himself. Ryan agreed, but he did not look happy about it. He said he would observe Scout for 3 days. Then he would make his recommendation to the Frontier Corps. Those 3 days were the longest of Jake's life. Scout seemed to understand that he was being tested. The Vraken was on his best behavior. He followed every command perfectly. He was gentle with everyone he met. He stayed calm even when Ryan watched him with suspicious eyes. On the first day, Ryan joined Jake and Scout on their morning patrol. They walked the settlement perimeter, checking for any problems. Scout moved with disciplined precision. His senses were alert, but he did not act aggressive toward anything. Halfway through the patrol, Scout suddenly stopped. His scales flattened against his body. He made a low warning sound. Jake immediately went on alert. He had learned to trust Scout's instincts completely. Scout led them to a section of ground that looked normal. But when Jake scanned it with his equipment, he found something alarming. There was volcanic activity building underneath them. The ground would collapse within hours. If people had been working in this area, they could have been killed. Jake called it in immediately. The settlement evacuated the area. By evening, the ground had indeed collapsed, creating a deep crater. Ryan watched all of this happen. He did not say anything, but Jake could see him thinking. On the second day, Scout helped find a missing research drone. The drone had crashed somewhere in the forest during a storm. It contained important data that the scientists needed. Human search teams had been looking for it for 2 days without success. Scout found it in 40 minutes. He tracked the electronic signature that humans could barely detect. The drone was stuck high in a tree. Scout climbed up and carefully brought it down in his jaws without damaging it further. Danny was thrilled. He told Ryan that Scout had just saved them weeks of work and thousands of credits worth of equipment. Ryan nodded but still said nothing about his decision. The third day was when everything changed. There was an accident at the settlement's power station. A coolant line ruptured. Superheated vapor started filling one of the maintenance rooms. Danny was inside, trapped by the steam. He could not get out without being burned. The human rescue team needed special protective gear. It would take at least 10 minutes to get the equipment and reach Danny. Peter said Danny might not have 10 minutes. The heat and chemicals in that vapor could kill him quickly. Jake was near the power station when the alarm went off. Scout was with him. They both ran toward the emergency. When they arrived, Jake could see Danny through the window. He was on the floor trying to crawl toward the door but failing. Scout saw Danny too. Before Jake could stop him, Scout pushed through the emergency door. The superheated vapor surrounded him immediately. Jake shouted for Scout to come back. But the Vraken kept going. Scout's scales protected him from the worst of the heat. He reached Danny and grabbed the engineer's tool belt in his jaws. Scout's grip was careful despite the emergency. He dragged Danny across the floor toward the door. It seemed to take forever. Jake's heart was pounding with fear. Finally, Scout pulled Danny out of the danger zone. The human rescue team rushed in with medical equipment. Danny was unconscious and had burns on his exposed skin, but Peter said he would survive. If Scout had not acted so fast, Danny would have died. Scout's scales were dull from the heat. He was breathing hard. Jake checked him over carefully. Scout had some minor burns where his scales were thinner, but he would be okay. Jake hugged Scout, not caring that the Vraken was still too hot to touch comfortably. He told Scout he was brave and amazing. Ryan had watched the whole thing. That evening, he requested a private meeting with Jake and Scout. They met in one of the empty conference rooms. Scout sat calmly next to Jake. His yellow eyes watched Ryan with what looked like patient curiosity. Ryan was quiet for a long time. Then he started talking. He said he had been in the Frontier Corps for 20 years. He had seen humanity make contact with 17 different species. Some became allies. Some became enemies. He had learned hard lessons about the dangers of treating alien creatures like they were human pets. But Scout was different. Ryan admitted he had never seen anything like the bond between Jake and Scout. It was not just training. It was not just conditioning. Scout made real choices. Scout chose to be part of the human community. Scout chose to protect humans even when it put him in danger. Ryan said he would recommend that Scout stay with the settlement. More than that, he wanted the Frontier Corps to study what happened here. The bond between humans and Vraken might be possible with others of Scout's species. This could change how humanity approached first contact situations in the future. Jake felt like a huge weight had lifted off his shoulders. He thanked Ryan. Scout seemed to understand that something good had happened. He made his happy chirping sound. But Ryan had more to say. He pointed out that they still did not know why Scout had been alone. They did not know what happened to his family or if there were other Vraken nearby. Understanding Scout's origins might help them understand his species better. Jake had wondered about this many times. He told Ryan that he wanted to search for Scout's family. He wanted to know where Scout came from and what happened to his pack. Ryan said he would approve an expedition into the deep forest. It would be dangerous. They might not like what they found. But Jake was right. They needed to know the truth. That night, Jake could not sleep. He lay in his bunk listening to Scout's breathing. The Vraken was curled up in his corner, sleeping peacefully. Jake thought about what they might find in the forest. Would Scout's family be alive? Would they be friendly or hostile? How would Scout react to meeting his own kind? Jake was scared of what they might discover. But he knew they had to try. Scout deserved to know where he came from. Scout deserved the chance to connect with his own species. Jake got up and walked over to Scout. He sat down next to the sleeping Vraken and put his hand on Scout's shoulder. Scout's scales were cool now, healed from the burns. The Vraken stirred slightly but did not wake up. Jake made a quiet promise. No matter what they found, no matter what happened, Jake would always be there for Scout. They were family. Nothing would change that. Outside, the purple forest glowed in the darkness. Somewhere in those trees were answers about Scout's past. Soon they would go looking for those answers. Jake just hoped they would be ready for whatever truth they found. 3 weeks later, the expedition into the deep forest began. Jake led the team. Peter came along to study any Vraken they might find. Karen joined them for security. 4 other colonists came as support crew. And, of course, Scout was with them. This journey was about him, after all. Scout seemed excited as they left the settlement. He moved ahead of the group, his nose to the ground. He was tracking something that only he could sense. Jake trusted Scout's instincts. If anyone could find the Vraken nesting grounds, it was Scout. The deep forest was different from the area near the settlement. The trees here were ancient and huge. Their trunks were as wide as buildings. The canopy above was so thick that almost no natural light reached the ground. The only light came from the glowing plants that covered everything. It was beautiful and eerie at the same time. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, calls and cries from creatures the humans had never seen. It reminded them that this was not their world. They were visitors here. This forest belonged to something else. On the second day, Scout's behavior changed. He became more cautious. His scales flattened against his body, the way they did when he sensed danger. He moved more slowly, checking everything before the group advanced. Jake ordered everyone to stay alert. They found the nesting grounds late that afternoon. It was a large clearing surrounded by tall rock formations. The rocks created natural walls that protected the area. The ground was covered with broken shells. The shells were huge, the size of basketballs. These were Vraken eggs, but something was wrong. Jake could feel it immediately. The shells were old. They had been sitting here for a long time. Rain and plants had damaged them. This place had been abandoned for many months, maybe even a year. Peter examined the area carefully. He looked at the shells and the rocks. He tested the soil. Finally, he confirmed what Jake already suspected. This nesting ground had not been used in at least a year. Maybe longer. Karen asked what would make the Vraken abandon their nesting ground. These creatures were supposed to be the top predators on this planet. What could drive them away? The answer was written on the rocks. Deep gouges cut into the stone walls. The marks were made by weapons, not claws. Something with advanced technology had attacked this place. The pattern of damage told a clear story. Jake said one word that made everyone angry. Poachers. Illegal hunters who came to protected worlds to steal rare animals. Vraken with their unique scales and size would be worth a fortune on the black market. Someone had attacked the nesting ground to steal the Vraken. Scout had moved to the center of the clearing. He stood completely still. His head was lowered. Then he made a sound that broke Jake's heart. It was a long, mournful cry. The sound was like a song of grief. Everyone stopped moving. They could hear the sadness in Scout's voice. Peter spoke quietly. This was Scout's home. He was mourning his family. Scout remembered this place. He remembered what happened here. Jake walked over to Scout slowly. He placed his hand on the Bracken's shoulder. Scout turned his head. His yellow eyes met Jake's. For a long moment, neither moved. Jake could see the pain in Scout's eyes, the loss, the confusion. Then Scout leaned into Jake's touch. He accepted the comfort Jake offered. Jake told Scout he was sorry. He was so sorry this happened. The team made camp in the clearing that night. They sat around a fire while Scout rested nearby. His head was in Jake's lap, something he had not done since he was a small cub. Jake stroked Scout's scales gently. Karen said they needed to report the poaching to the Frontier Corps. If illegal hunters were operating on this world, everyone was in danger. The settlement could be at risk too. Peter agreed. But he said there was something else to consider. Scout was just a cub when his family was taken. That meant somewhere on this planet there might be adult Vraken who survived. Vraken who escaped the poachers. These survivors might remember humans as enemies. Jake looked down at Scout. He said they needed to find the survivors, not just to warn the settlement about potential danger. Scout deserved to meet his own kind. Scout deserved to know he was not alone in the universe. Karen pointed out that it could be dangerous. They had no idea how adult Vraken would react to Scout. Scout had been living with humans for months. He might smell wrong to them. He might act wrong. The adult Vraken might reject him or even attack him. Jake said they still had to try. It was the right thing to do. Peter agreed. He said they would need to expand their search. Look for signs of Vraken living in other areas. The survivors would have relocated far from the nesting ground to avoid the poachers returning. The search took another week. Scout guided them through terrain that would have been impossible for humans alone. He seemed to understand what they were looking for. He used senses the humans did not have. He could smell things in the air that meant nothing to them. He could hear sounds their equipment could not detect. On the 8th day, Scout found fresh tracks. They were huge prints pressed into soft ground. Adult Vraken, multiple individuals. The tracks led toward a mountain range north of their position. Peter confirmed the tracks were recent, maybe only a few days old. There was definitely a Vraken pack nearby. The question was whether they should approach or observe from a distance first. Jake looked at Scout. The Vraken was intensely focused on the tracks. Every part of his body was alert. Scout wanted to follow them. Scout needed to follow them. They followed the tracks to a series of caves in the mountains. The caves were large, with openings big enough for the massive Vraken to enter and exit easily. Scout became very still. He stared at the cave entrances. Jake could tell Scout knew something. Could Scout sense his own kind inside? Karen asked what their plan was. Going into those caves could be suicide. They had no idea how many Vraken were in there or how they would react to humans. Jake said he would go in with Scout, just the two of them. A full team would look like a threat. But Scout with one human, his family, maybe that would be different. Maybe that would be seen as an attempt to communicate rather than an invasion. Karen immediately protested. She said it was too dangerous. Jake could be killed. But Jake was firm. He said this was the only way. The adult Vraken needed to make the choice about whether to accept contact. A large, armed human group would force them to be defensive. Peter looked worried but agreed. He said Jake was right. First contact needed to be on the Vraken's terms. But Jake needed to take emergency equipment. A beacon to call for help if things went wrong. Jake checked his gear. He made sure he had his translator device, even though it probably did not have any Vraken language data. He activated his emergency beacon so the team could track his location. Then he looked at Scout. Jake asked if Scout was ready. Scout's answer was to move toward the caves. He looked back once to make sure Jake was following. Jake took a deep breath. He told his team to be ready to evacuate if things went badly. Then he followed Scout into the darkness. The cave entrance swallowed them. Jake's helmet light created strange shadows on the walls. He could see claw marks everywhere. Old paintings covered some sections of the walls. They looked primitive but intentional. Art. The Vraken made art. Scout moved confidently through the tunnels. He was following a path he somehow knew. Maybe it was scent. Maybe it was instinct. Jake did not know. He just followed and tried to stay calm. They walked deeper into the mountain. The tunnels twisted and turned. Jake lost track of how far they had gone. Then suddenly, the tunnel opened into a huge cavern. Jake's breath caught in his throat. 6 adult Vraken were waiting for them. They were enormous and terrifying. Each one stood over 7 feet tall. Their black scales seemed to swallow the light from Jake's helmet. Their yellow eyes glowed like fire. All 6 were watching Jake and Scout with complete attention. Jake realized this was the moment that would decide everything. Would the Vraken see them as threats, as food, or as something else? He was about to find out. Jake stood frozen in the massive cavern. 6 adult Vraken stared at him and Scout. The creatures were bigger than Jake had imagined. They were powerful and dangerous. Every instinct told Jake to run, but he stayed still and tried to look calm. Scout stepped forward. He made sounds that Jake had never heard before. Clicks and chirps and low rumbles. It was Vraken language. Scout was talking to the adults. Jake realized that Scout had always known how to speak to his own kind. He had just never had anyone to speak to before. The adult Vraken listened to Scout. Their body language changed. They were still alert but not aggressive anymore. They seemed curious instead of threatening. One of the adults stepped closer to Scout. She was slightly larger than the others. Scars covered her shoulders and back. She must be the leader. The scarred Vraken sniffed Scout carefully. She examined him from every angle. Then she made a questioning sound. Scout turned to look at Jake. Then he looked back at the leader. Scout moved to stand between Jake and the adult Vraken. His position seemed deliberate, like he was trying to show something. The leader looked at Jake for a long time. Her intelligence was obvious in her eyes. Jake felt like he was being judged. She was deciding whether he was worthy of her attention or not. Then she did something Jake did not expect. She lowered her massive head. It looked like a gesture of acknowledgement, like she was greeting him as an equal. Jake spoke quietly. He activated his translator device even though he doubted it would work. He told the leader his name was Jake Morrison. He said Scout was his family. He had protected Scout and raised him. The translator made strange noises. It was trying to process sounds it was not designed for, but the Vraken leader seemed to understand his meaning even if not his exact words. She made a rumbling sound. To Jake's amazement, his translator produced words. The voice was mechanical and wrong, but the words were clear. The leader said that the pack thought their cub was dead. She asked if Jake had protected the cub. Jake quickly said yes. He explained that Scout was alone in the forest. Jake had brought Scout to his settlement. The humans had protected Scout, fed him, and kept him safe. The leader asked if the human settlement feared the cub. Jake thought about how to answer. He decided to be honest. He said some humans were afraid at first, but Scout proved himself. Scout protected the humans, so the humans protected him back. The leader seemed to consider this. The other adult Vraken had relaxed their aggressive poses. They were still watchful but no longer ready to attack. One of them approached Scout and touched heads with him. It was clearly a gesture of affection. Scout responded the same way, making soft, happy sounds. The leader asked if Jake's settlement hunted Vraken. Jake understood the real question beneath those words. He said no, but other humans did. Bad humans attacked the nesting ground. They killed many Vraken and took many more. A rumble went through all the adult Vraken. It was a sound of anger and pain. The leader's scales rattled like falling rocks. She said the bad humans killed many of their pack. They took many away. The pack had to run and hide. Jake told her he was sorry. He meant it deeply. He said his people had laws against what the poachers did. If the Vraken helped the humans, they could stop the bad humans. They could protect the pack and the world. The leader studied Jake again. Then she looked at Scout. She asked a question that made Jake's heart hurt. She asked if the cub chose his human family over his Vraken family. Scout made a series of sounds. He looked between Jake and the pack. His body language showed confusion and conflict. Jake had never seen Scout look so uncertain. Jake crouched down to Scout's level. He spoke gently. He told Scout that he did not have to choose. Scout had his pack, his real family. They needed him. Jake would understand if Scout wanted to stay with them. It was okay. Scout walked over to Jake and pressed his massive head against Jake's chest. It was something Scout did when he wanted comfort or wanted to give comfort. Then Scout moved to the leader and touched his head to hers. He went back and forth between Jake and the leader. Between human and Vraken, like he was trying to connect two different worlds. The leader made a sound that might have been Vraken laughter. She said the cub had two packs. This was good. This was new and interesting. Over the next several hours, something amazing happened. With Scout acting as a bridge, Jake and the Vraken pack began to really communicate. The translator learned their language patterns. It became more accurate with every conversation. The pack leader shared the story of the attack on their nesting ground. She described the poachers' weapons and ships. Most importantly, she described markings on the ships that could identify them. Jake explained why his settlement was on this planet. They were scientists and explorers. They were not hunters. He promised that his commander would help track down the poachers. They would make sure the Vraken were safe. The leader said something that made Jake think. She said it was strange. Some humans hurt the pack, but one human saved their cub. They were the same species but had different hearts. Jake agreed. He said that was true of any species. Everyone had the capacity for both good and bad inside them. What mattered was which side they chose. As morning approached, Jake knew he needed to return to his team. They would be worried. The leader, whose name translated to something like Stone Who Endures, walked Jake to the cave entrance. Scout walked beside both of them. Stone Who Endures asked if the cub would return to the human pack. Jake looked at Scout. He said it was Scout's choice. Scout made a decisive sound. He moved to Jake's side, but he also looked back at Stone Who Endures with obvious love and respect. The leader said the cub could visit. Jake could visit too. The packs would learn from each other. This was a good path forward. Jake felt honored and overwhelmed. He said his commander would be grateful for the trust. Stone Who Endures looked at Jake one last time. She said Jake was a good human. He had made the cub strong and healthy. The pack would remember this. The pack would protect Jake's settlement now. Two packs sharing one territory. Jake felt the weight of those words. The Vraken were offering an alliance, a friendship between species. It was more than he had hoped for. When Jake returned to his team, they were relieved and excited. Karen could not believe the Vraken had not attacked. Peter was already planning how to communicate the breakthrough to the settlement. Commander Hayes was indeed honored when she heard the full report. Captain Ryan was even more impressed. He called it the most important diplomatic development in Frontier Corps history. This proved that humans and alien species could form genuine bonds, not just political treaties. The poachers were tracked down within a month. The information from Stone Who Endures led the Frontier Corps right to them. The poachers were arrested. Their operation was destroyed. 3 Vraken who had been captured were returned to the pack. Scout insisted that Jake come with him to witness the reunion. It was one of the most emotional moments of Jake's life. The settlement and the Vraken pack established regular contact. Peter worked with the Vraken to understand their language and culture. Scout always served as translator. Danny helped design warning systems that would alert both communities to dangers. The two groups began to share knowledge and resources. Scout split his time between both worlds. He would spend weeks at the human settlement, sleeping in Jake's quarters and joining patrols. Then he would return to the caves to hunt with his pack and participate in their social activities. He was unique. He belonged fully to neither world, but connected both in ways nobody had imagined possible. 6 months after the first contact, Jake sat outside the settlement with Scout lying beside him. Above them, 2 of the planet's 3 moons painted the landscape in silver light. In the distance, Jake could see the glow from the Vraken caves where Stone Who Endures and her pack lived. Jake scratched behind Scout's jaw ridge. He told Scout that when Scout first bit his boot, Jake never imagined any of this would happen. Scout made his contented rumbling sound, his version of purring. Jake said Scout had brought 2 species together. Scout proved that family was not about being the same species. Family was about trust and protection and caring for each other. Commander Hayes approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jake and sat down beside them. Scout shifted to rest his head in her lap. He only did this with people he truly trusted. Lisa was part of his human pack now. Lisa said the Frontier Corps wanted to start a formal program. They were calling it cross-species integration. They wanted Jake and Scout to train the first teams. They wanted to teach others what had worked here. Jake asked Lisa what she thought about it. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said she thought they had learned something important. The galaxy was full of species that humans did not understand. Maybe the key to peace was not just diplomacy and treaties. Maybe sometimes it started with one individual choosing trust instead of fear. Scout made a soft sound like he was agreeing. In the distance, a Fracken call echoed across the landscape. Scout raised his head and answered with his own call. It was a sound that carried both his human upbringing and his Fracken heritage, a voice that belonged to two worlds. Jake thought about everything that had happened. Scout had started as a